Hello, viewer number 0. What you're about to see is an examination of polarities in viewership. Whenever possible, try to integrate the meaning behind the aesthetics without reducing it. You're watching Perception Culture.
Love Witch is a homage to 70s exploitation horror flicks.
Writer-director Anna Biller knew exactly what she was doing when she attempted to make this a throwback to the classic exploitation films.
It's an old story, utilized to make some nice comments on the issues surrounding feminism, but I found the story a bit too sexualized and the actual content a bit too light, even if it does look fantastic.
The makeup is so heavy that it is not possible to know whether the lead actress is beautiful or not. At least she has a beautiful body, and maybe this is the only attraction since she is naked most of the time.
Advertised as a horror comedy but more like an amateur soft, without the horror comedy or any semblance of an engaging storyline.
I've heard so many comments where people say, well, it's style over substance, or it's not about anything, or it has no story. I think, well, it's a woman's story. It's like, okay, it's not about anything. Does that mean like a woman's life isn't about anything? I mean, to me, that's really fascinating.
The day he left me was the day that I died. But then I was reborn as a witch.
The Love Witch is a 2016 comedy horror film that was written and directed by Anna Biller. In the film, the main character Elaine is a modern-day witch, who after the death of her ex-husband Jerry moves to a small town in which witches are not quite understood but have so far been tolerated. She meets Trish, an interior decorator who designed the apartment Elaine is renting from her friend and mentor in witchcraft, Barbara. Trish befriends Elaine by taking her to the local tea room where they discuss their personal approaches to romantic relationships. There, she also meets Richard, Trish's husband, who seems to be enticed by Elaine's piercing stare. In the effort to attract a man who loves her as she loves him, Elaine performs a ritual. Soon, she meets Wayne, a literature professor who takes her to his cabin in the woods. Elaine gives him a potion, which without Wayne's knowledge contains hallucinogens. After sleeping together, Wayne becomes clingy and emotional, which immediately puts Elaine off. The next day, she finds Wayne has died, buries him, and leaves a witch bottle containing her urine and a used tampon next to his grave. While Trish is out of town, Elaine seduces Richard and the two have an affair. However, Richard too becomes obsessive and Elaine breaks off the relationship. Trish returns to a visibly distraught husband, but their inability to communicate leaves her unaware of the reasons behind his distress. Meanwhile, Wayne's colleague has reported him missing and police officers Griff and Steve locate his fresh grave at the cabin. In the course of their investigation, Griff traces the witch bottle from the scene to Elaine but ends up falling in love with her, which leads him to believe she has nothing to do with the death of Wayne. The two go on a date and end up being part of a mock wedding performed by Elaine's coven at a Renaissance fair. Steve, the other police officer, remains suspicious of Elaine and reveals to Griff that her ex-husband Jerry also died of a drug overdose shortly before remarrying. Sadly, Trish discovers that Richard has unalived himself in their bathtub. Distraught by his death, she invites Elaine to tea again where she shares her woes. Elaine, on the other hand, is over the moon due to her connection with Griff and lets Trish try on the ring she got during the mock wedding. Trish forgets to return the ring to Elaine while they're still in the tea room and goes to her apartment to leave it there instead. She finds a shrine to all her dead lovers in Elaine's bedroom, including Richard, Trish's husband. Elaine arrives, the two have a fight, and Trish takes items from the shrine as evidence before leaving the apartment. After this happens, Elaine meets Griff at a cabaret and he confronts her about the deaths of Richard and Wayne, along with the evidence Trish brought to the police from Elaine's altar. They also have DNA linking her to Wayne's grave. The patrons of the cabaret hear their conversation and, prejudiced against witches, attempt to Alter Lane, Griff helps her escape back to her apartment, where she realizes Griff will never love her the way she wishes and stabs him in the heart. Holding a bloody dagger, she smiles while imagining their wedding if he had actually proposed.
So you're an artist?
Yes, I am.
Due to budgetary constraints, it took Biller years to complete the film as in addition to writing and directing. She also produced, edited, did set and costume design as well as the music for the film. The costumes for the Renaissance Fair scenes alone took her a year to make. Filmed on 35mm, The Love Witch employs in-camera effects and lighting techniques that were used in high-budget Technicolor productions of the 50s and 60s. For example, the use of rear projection photography during the driving scene at the beginning of the film bears a clear resemblance to the driving scene with Kim Novak in Hitchcock's The Birds, an homage to glamorous lead actresses of the bygone era. Additionally, Biller put a huge amount of effort into the set and costume design, sourcing old furniture, sewing the costumes based on vintage patterns, designing paintings, and even taking 6 months to make the pentagram rug scene in Elaine's apartment. This level of artistic detail helps to create a cohesive atmosphere in the film's subject matter, even though some reviews note confusion regarding the mixing of modern cars and phones with Elaine's 60s style of hair and clothing. It's almost as though filmmakers can have agency over the style of set design without making a period piece. Through the writing and actors' performances, Biller creates an enticing theatrical portrayal of the gender polarities imposed upon cis-heterosexual couples under patriarchy and explores how being systematically objectified affects a woman's life. All these techniques combined create a captivating aura of glamour around Elaine, which is what she projects out into the world in an effort to attract love. Ultimately, this leads to Elaine's demise as she is too far removed from the rest of the world to be truly seen.
I'm the love witch. I'm your ultimate fantasy.
That's right.
As we saw from the examples of reviews at the beginning of this program, audiences sometimes have a difficult time seeing the deeper meaning of this film and get stuck trying to categorize it based on visual cues. A frequently applied term to the Love Witch in reviews is exploitation. But does it really apply? Films under the exploitation genre are usually 1. Independently produced, 2. Low-budget feature films, 3. Contain the exhibition of non-explicit sexual situations and nudity, all of which are qualities the Love Witch shares. However, if we dig a bit deeper into the filmography of this genre in the 60s and 70s when it was most popular, we might detect some other patterns. Roger Vadim, Tinto Brass, Russ Meyer, Jack Hill, Joe D'Amato, Jesus Franco. These are just some of the names that show up as known directors from this time. Unless you dig deep enough to find Doris Wishman, it is rare to come across any female directors. In an industry that was self-censored by the Hays Code, exploitation did play a key part in expanding what could be shown on screen. However, this mainly proved to be a vehicle for the transition into a much larger pornography industry. In a 2016 New York Times interview, exploitation film historian Frank Henenlotter says, "These films were made by businessmen, not artists. The point was if you have a camera and you can get some girls in front of the camera, you would make some dollars." Here's what Biller has said in an interview regarding the matter.
In terms of exploitation, I kind of see why people say that because it's an older looking film and it's got some nudity. But the exploitation directors were making films for men, and the reason they sold is because they were more explicit than anything else that was on the market. So you can see how different it is in terms of my practice. I'm making very non-explicit films, which are much less explicit than any pornography on the market, and I'm making it from a female point of view.
According to the experts, men are very fragile. They can get crushed down if you assert yourself in any way.
In the 1975 essay Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey argues that the average use of cinematic technologies and practices in classical Hollywood films position the spectator as a masculine subject. This is more commonly referred to as the male gaze and means that the audience should identify with the male protagonist and female characters are merely portrayed as objects of desire. It is not difficult to understand why the male gaze became the most common visual and aesthetic presentation in narrative cinema. In order to depict what you define as desirable in a film and share it with others, you have to have access to means of production and distribution. And who has historically had this in Hollywood? In a recent study from 2020, researchers found that women were more involved in film production during the silent era than previously perceived. However, with the emergence and consolidation of the Hollywood studio system, which decreased independent filmmaking, there was a drastic decrease in gender balance across several functions in the US movie industry. But, dear narrator, one might think, it's been nearly a century since the silent era and almost 50 years since Mulvey's essay. Surely things have changed? Well, from a 2020 study by Martha M. Lawson, PhD, tracking women's employment on top-grossing films from the last 22 years, we can see that in 2019, only 21% of behind-the-scenes roles on the top 250 films were filled by women. In 1998, this number was 17%, which means that within the span of 2 decades, there was an increase of only 4% in the number of women working on the top-grossing films. The study also revealed that only a staggering 5% of top 250 films had a female cinematographer and only 6% had a female composer. Yet, women still account for roughly half of film audiences, since a majority of films are written, directed, produced, edited and scored by men. It's easy to see why most spectators, regardless of gender, are mostly trained to empathize with the male perspective. So, if the most common film form used in Hollywood mirrors the desires of men in a patriarchal society, how do female filmmakers engage with narrative cinema?
Are you saying witchcraft had nothing to do with it?
Witchcraft is just a way of concentrating energy. You can only work with what's already there.
In her essay, Mulvey further breaks down the mechanics of gaze by employing the concept of scopophilia. There are circumstances in which looking itself is a source of pleasure, just as, in the reverse formation, there is pleasure in being looked at. In an interview, Biller explains that her films respond to Mulvey in the way that they try to create a cinematic world of visual pleasure for women, drawing inspiration from what she herself finds pleasurable in her own fantasy life. She approaches the narrative from the perspective of the female gaze. Biller also explains that she isn't trying to speak for all women. With so few narratives from alternative viewpoints outside of the male gaze available, the audience's tendency is to generalize storylines that depict the other. A story about a woman represents all women, a queer narrative represents everyone who is not straight, and so on. However, thanks to Biller's skillful writing, Elaine's dehumanizing internal conditioning becomes instantly recognizable to anyone assigned female at birth who has been assumed heterosexual in a patriarchal and heteronormative society. As inspiration in creating the character of Elaine, Biller cites many films which feature fantastic performances from lead actresses: Leave Her to Heaven, Secret Ceremony, Black Narcissus, All About Eve, Belle du Jour, and many others. A quality these films share with The Love Witch is that they show more nuanced storylines of female characters. The Love Witch is ultimately a tragic story about how the routine objectification of female experiences in society causes women to dehumanize themselves with horrific consequences. This is why the label of exploitation is misplaced when it comes to The Love Witch, in Biller's own words.
I like the way the better ones foreground a woman's desire and experience, which is so rare in movies. But my movies are actually the opposite of exploitation, they are more exploration. Even if a female is being exploited in my movies, she's still driving the narrative. The exploitation movies of the 60s were certainly voyeuristic, but the better ones also focused on the tragic elements of a woman's experience, a woman who has very few options socially. And those are the stories that interest me.
You have two selves, dark and quiet, that you show the world. Who do you give that to? The rainbow.
I give the rainbow to you. Right now.
Horror as a genre is a wonderful tool for storytellers and audiences alike to mirror and reflect on traumas and fears that echo within us all. And this is what The Love Witch accomplishes so well. Contrasted by the colorful and pleasurable visuals, it digs deep to reveal the horrors of objectification under patriarchal systems. Elaine has been taught to minimize herself in order to be a vessel for a man's desire. The men in her life have been taught to value the looks and palatability of women above all else, leaving them unable to enjoy the process of opening oneself up to another human being. No one is able to form healthy connections, leaving the world an empty and miserable place, even if it looks fantastic. As a way to ground and take back power from this tragic social structure, Biller highlights the contrast in gender polarities in a lighthearted and comedic way. She does this by allowing the spectator to hear the characters' thoughts through voiceover, revealing that what the characters think and feel is usually in opposition with how they act. Moreover, it exposes how characters on opposite sides of the gender spectrum have differing ideas and approaches to life, which discourages understanding of the other. When examining the common themes of reviews about The Love Witch, an ironic pattern reveals itself. There are spectators who absolutely adore the film and others who are not able to see its value beyond its visual style.
The more you know him, the more you love him.
The more you get to know a woman, the less you can feel about her.
For a film which many claim isn't about anything, it sure does seem to provoke reactions from viewers that are very similar to the subject matter shown on screen.
Those characterizations is like another example of men just being unable to listen to women, unable to hear a woman's story. Because I've heard so many comments where people say, well, it's style over substance, or it's not about anything, or it has no story. I think, well, it's a woman's story. It's like, okay, it's not about anything. Does that mean like a woman's life isn't about anything? I mean, to me, that's really fascinating. And it shows the importance of actually trying to make women's stories. Because there are a lot of men who've actually never seen one, because they avoid movies that are labeled chick flicks. So I'm actually doing this thing where I'm actually trying to integrate my audience.
It is clear that Biller has done her research and is highly literate in film form from the ideas that she has expressed in interviews. Since Biller is a filmmaker and the subject matter she discusses falls outside of the established norm that the average spectators are used to, there is a lot of resistance from wider audiences to accept the meaning she creates through her practice. Reducing The Love Witch to a mere visual spectacle or the sexploitation label reinforces the unconscious patriarchal structures the film is working to question and dismantle. The work of independent filmmakers such as Biller, who push the limits of accepted film form, could be called witchcraft. It could also be shunned by some audiences who only feel comfortable in more widely established norms. But at the end of the day, The Love Witch will remain a piece of work that reminds many viewers that there is value in creative exploration, even if integrating a new experience involves some growing pains. So, the next time you have the urge to reduce a story to nothing, consider, is it actually revealing something you are not yet ready to see in yourself? This program thanks you for your sustained attention. Like, comment, and subscribe to
Love me. Love me. Love me.